Happy Monday. Welcome to the briefing room. Coming to you from the Washington Bureau of ABC News, I'm John Santucci. Thanks for joining us on ABC News Live, and a busy week here at ABC News. We are gearing up for our first debate of the 2020 cycle, getting ready to host it down in Houston, where George Stephanopoulos, David Muir, Lindsay Davis, and Jorge Ramos of Univision are getting ready to moderate. One night on ABC, 10 candidates taking the stage. We're going to have much more on that coming up. But we're going to begin here in Washington, where Congress, they are back from their summer recess. 6 weeks off, and the first topic on the agenda, gun control. And that's where we're going to start right now. We saw a press conference earlier today from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, where they were addressing this very topic, what they plan to do, and how they hope President Trump and Republicans in Congress will join their efforts. Take a listen to that press conference from earlier today.
Two people in Washington can make sure the background checks bill passes: Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. It is totally up to them. The question now is whether Leader McConnell will allow the Senate to consider the House-passed background checks bill on the Senate floor. That is the number one question looming over this Capitol as we return. President Trump has a historic opportunity to save lives by indicating his support for the House-passed bill.
Okay, so where does this all go? We are joined right now by ABC's Catherine Falder. She covers Capitol Hill and the White House for us. And over at the White House, Jordan Phelps has been watching what's happening over at the administration. Let's start here in the Bureau with Catherine. So they're back. They're back from Congress, from recess. I'm sure you're ready to go run around the halls up there with our team. So where does this start right now? Because we know the White House has been going back and forth. There have been efforts by Senators Manchin and Toomey to get something done right now up on Capitol Hill. What's the latest?
Yeah, and we've reported that the president's staff has had bipartisan talks over the recess about gun control. But I think the way you put it, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, that seems to be where it is right now. The president has obviously contradicted himself a little bit on whether or not he supports background checks. House Democrats say they already passed 2 background check bills, and now they're waiting on Mitch McConnell to bring it to the floor. He said at one point he'd be open to it, but he's waiting on the White House. The White House says they're waiting on Congress. And I'd say that McConnell did just speak briefly on the floor moments ago, where he laid out the agenda for September, October, into the fall, and he didn't mention this at all, at least from my initial read of it. He just finished speaking some time ago. So I think they're in a tough position, right? Because as you and I have reported, the White House had asked the campaign to gather data on this issue. And we know that the base, they think that it would be politically harmful in a sense to the president to do any sort of legislation. But at the same time, he wants to do something. But right now, we're just ping-ponging back and forth between the two. Now, later this week, the House Judiciary Committee will mark up some bills. We'll see where that goes. Yeah,
and as you said, the information that we reported on is that the campaign data was looking at the Trump base, but also looking at independent voters. There is some other data that we're watching right now, and that is our new ABC News Washington Post poll that shows 6 in 10 Americans are concerned about a mass shooting. Obviously, with everything we saw over the summer recess, from shootings in California to Texas and Ohio. Let's go down the street to the White House, where we find Jordan Phelps. So, Jordan, as Catherine was just talking about, we know that the White House was waiting for this data to come from the campaign. Our sources tell us they've received it. It seems to indicate that right now it would not help the president, this is their data, not help the president to take any action on gun control at this point in time.
Sure, John. There's that data from the campaign. There's also this new poll showing that 89% of Americans support doing something on background checks. The president just departed the White House. He actually wasn't asked about gun control at all. So where the president is today is a bit unclear. But, John, as we've been talking about, we know that the president said in the immediate wake of those shootings that he thought it was the time to do something meaningful on background checks. We've seen him obviously cool on that over time, but we know there's been a concerted effort over here at the White House and within the broader administration over the last month to craft a variety of solutions that they could bring forward. We're expecting a proposal to come from the White House at some point. Our latest guidance last week was that we could expect something this week. But John, I just talked to a senior administration official who said we could expect something this month. So that timeline is really sliding. And at a certain point, you have to wonder if people are dragging their heels here.
And on that note, Jordan, coming back over to Catherine with that, one of the things Mitch McConnell has said repeatedly is that he will not bring anything to the floor of the Senate unless he knows it has President Trump's support.
Right, exactly. And then that gets back to who's really crafting this legislation. As we also reported, the Department of Justice, for example, a little over 2 weeks ago, sent some sort of legislative package over to the White House. We've been told that there's some sort of holdup inside the White House counsel's office on the legal language about that. They haven't heard back from the White House on that proposal. So, right, Mitch McConnell will bring something most likely to the floor if it has the support of the president. But of course, he's waiting for
And Jordan Phelps,
Congress.
finally on this topic, going back to you, one of the other things we find in the ABC News Post poll is that 76% believe mental health screenings would help. Donald Trump on the campaign trail has been saying that nonstop. The president's saying that this is a mental health issue. Do we think that that is an area the White House is exploring, especially given what we're seeing in our new poll, and not going to go towards background checks or an assault weapons ban?
John, background checks have always been the big question mark. Mental health is the area where President Trump and this administration are most comfortable, and something that the president always talks about when he talks about addressing the root causes of these mass shootings. So that is certainly something that this White House is very seriously exploring. But John, I've had some officials over here argue to me that addressing this mental health issue is really the same thing, they argue, as going after background checks, because they say they're one and the same.
Jordan Phelps at the White House, Catherine Faulders covering Capitol Hill for us. Ladies, thank you both. We're going to switch gears now in the briefing room. We learned something over the weekend, go figure, from President Trump's Twitter account, and that is that the president was negotiating with the Taliban, potentially for a peace deal. Let's bring in ABC's Justin Fischel and ABC's Connor Finnegan over at the State Department for this one. So, Connor, let me begin with you. First of all, I know you've been trying to figure this out, and I feel like I'm the 75th person to ask you this, but have you been able to pinpoint, Connor, what exactly happened this weekend between this possible negotiation deal that was supposed to take place allegedly at Camp David?
John, it's a question that I think many American officials are also asking themselves still. President Trump tweeting on late Saturday night that he had invited the Taliban's leadership, as well as the government of President Ashraf Ghani, to come to Camp David. It would have been a really surreal spectacle for him to host the militant group that harbored al-Qaeda operatives that were responsible for 9/11 just days before the anniversary of those attacks. But what we know so far is that this was about closing the deal. The U.S. and the Taliban have been in talks for over 9 months now, over 9 rounds of discussions, and they had finally reached an agreement in principle last week. The U.S. chief negotiator Zalmay Khalilzad even went to Kabul to brief the Afghan government on what that deal included. It meant that the U.S. would withdraw its troops, begin that withdrawal, including of 5,000 troops within 135 days. It also meant that the Taliban would commit to not allow Afghanistan to be a safe haven for terrorists ever again. What's unclear now is that after the president has canceled this Camp David meeting, where does that deal stand, and whether or not the U.S. will implement it?
Well, and the president was just asked about this, Connor, before departing the White House, where these negotiations stand. Let's take a listen to what the president was asked on the South Lawn.
We had a meeting scheduled. It was my idea, and it was my idea to terminate it. I didn't discuss it with anybody else. When I heard, very simply, that they killed one of our soldiers and 12 other innocent people, I said, there's no way I'm meeting on that basis. There's no way I'm meeting. They did a mistake. They thought that they had to kill people in order to put themselves in a little better negotiating position. When they did that, they killed 12 people. One happened to be a great American soldier.
And Justin Fischel joins us now here in the briefing room, covers and leads our White House coverage team, formerly covered the Pentagon for us. So, Justin, the big thing here that stood out to me is that Donald Trump has always compared himself to Barack Obama, saying that he's done more than Barack Obama. But when there's always a tweet for that, it's interesting because when President Barack Obama tried to negotiate with the Taliban, Donald Trump attacked them, saying, why would you do that? Why would you try to make a peace deal here? But now we see the president trying to do the same thing.
Negotiating with the Taliban has stumped every president back to Bush and beyond that. It's why we've been there for 18 years. It's why it's our longest war. It's not something that's easily done. Connor's absolutely right. If they had done this weekend. If we had learned that this secret meeting occurred in Camp David, there would be enormous headlines today had they actually inked something. The problem was that the president says he got upset with this suicide car bomb in Kabul. It killed a U.S. service member. And he said over Twitter, "This is why I'm canceling. They can't negotiate in good faith." What's interesting about that, though,
The timeline, right?
Well, we had Mike Pompeo on this week on Sunday. He said, just in the last 10 days, the U.S. has killed 1,000 Taliban. I mean, that's clearly, clearly blood is being shed on both sides. So the question is, was it something more complicated than that? Why did, I mean, not to diminish the blood loss in Afghanistan, but I mean, this has been happening for 18 years. The New York Times did a good write-up on this today. They were basically saying that the Taliban leaders coming to the United States wanted to make sure a deal had been inked before they sat down with the president at Camp David. The president wanted to close the deal. He wanted to make it, so put his mark on it, and then go out and have something. So,
which is not surprising considering how the president negotiates.
Right. So maybe there was a disruption there. There's also parts of the deal that had been signed in principle, figured out in principle, but not totally figured out. Like, what do you do with all the Taliban prisoners? And Connor alluded to this. I think the big question going forward is, he said on law that talks are dead. Well, but we know he still wants to pull out U.S. troops. Is he going to do that anyway? He's talking about pulling 5,000 out.
And he has been saying that since he was on the campaign trail before he got into elected office. But you mentioned Mike Pompeo. He was on the Sunday show with George this week talking about this very meeting. Take a listen to that exchange.
The Taliban overreached. They killed an American in an effort to gain leverage at the negotiating table. And President Trump said enough.
So are the peace talks now dead? Ambassador Khalilzad's efforts dead as well?
He's coming home for now. I hope it's the case that the Taliban will change their behavior, will recommit to the things that we've been talking to them about for months. In the end, this will be resolved through a series of conversations. I hope the Taliban will agree to meet with the Afghan government. President Ghani asked for that.
They say the jihad's going to continue. They just put out a statement.
Yeah, we'll see. Let me assure you, America's capacity to protect our nation from a terror attack ever emanating from that place again, that effort will continue.
Mike Pompeo speaking to George Stephanopoulos this past Sunday. I want to go back to Connor Finnegan now, because Connor, one of the things that I've been tracking anyway, I think you and I actually spoke about this the end of last week, is just the dynamics right now among Donald Trump's foreign relations team, if you will. And the biggest disagreement that we see here is that the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and the National Security Advisor, Ambassador John Bolton, they don't see head-to-head here.
Yeah, that's right, John. For weeks now, there have been reports of tension between these two key senior advisors to President Trump. They ideologically match up on a lot of issues, in particular on Iran, where they both support the maximum pressure campaign against Tehran. But Afghanistan has been a point of departure between these two. John Bolton does not support the peace deal that the U.S. government has been working on with the Taliban, whereas Mike Pompeo, as the Secretary of State, has really been the driving force behind it. It's his special envoy, Zalmay Khalilzad, who's been in the room with a large State Department team negotiating with the Taliban, and he's really owned this entire process. He was in Kabul as recently as June. As June. And so there's this major point of departure here, and on a couple of other key issues, I think most importantly on North Korea. John Bolton, again, not really supporting the negotiations, doesn't believe that Kim Jong-un can be trusted. Mike Pompeo, ever the dutiful soldier, is following through on President Trump's orders.
Connor Finnegan at the State Department, thank you, sir. And before we wrap up on this topic, you and I were just talking about one of the attacks President Trump is getting here is that this was a meeting that was going to be held at Camp David. He was actually attacked by Liz Cheney, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney. And it comes on the heels of her saying that in response to the September 11th attacks, which we're about to have another anniversary of in just the next couple of days, that is where the nation's leaders actually met to plan the response after the 2001 attacks.
And this, I think, is a lot of reflexive Trump bashing, both on the Democratic side and, and of course there are some Republicans who went after him too. But I mean, I think that most Americans are at a point after 18 years, they're not going to really mind so much where you get the deal, how you get the deal. If it is our goal to not have a permanent force in Afghanistan, it's time to make a deal no matter where you do it. And the other broader point, yes, it's just before the 9/11 anniversary. That resonates with people. But I mean, peace deals are not typically made, as they say, with your friends. Right. And you know, so I think the point is not so much about where and the mechanism by how he might have done it, just that he was trying to do it. So it is a piece of criticism we're seeing the day after that might sort of seems sort of small in the bigger picture of the whole thing.
Justin Fischel, thank you for that. Much appreciated. We'll have much more on this story tonight on ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir. We're going to switch gears, though, here in the briefing room because we've got a lot of activity happening out on the campaign trail, one of which, Donald Trump, the president, is heading down to North Carolina tonight, where he is getting ready for a Keep America Great Again rally, and that's where we find ABC's Rachel Scott. She's been on the campaign trail for, God, Rachel, what, like 6 days straight? You've been all over the country in just a little bit here, but you're now in North Carolina. You've been out there talking to voters already online for the president's rally tonight. What are you hearing so far? What's on their minds on this busy week?
Well, it's ahead of the special election that's happening tomorrow. So what I'm hearing is tomorrow is a key day here. Normally, this would be a Republican shoo-in. I mean, this district has been held by Republicans since the 1960s. But now we're seeing what some are calling a very tight election. We have the special election tomorrow. Dan Bishop will be here. The president has obviously endorsed him. But this is more than just about this race here, John. This is about 2020. And this matters for the president because it's going to be a test case for him. It's been a summer of inflammatory rhetoric. We've had recession fears. We've had mass shootings. And this candidate here in this district represents a lot of what President Trump believes. He endorses his rhetoric. He believes that we should be tough on immigration. He believes that we should support the Second Amendment rights. And so the question here is going to be, if this Republican can win amid all of the rhetoric, amid all of the backlash that the president has gotten this summer, then maybe Republicans don't have to be too concerned ahead of 2020. But if Democrats pull out a win here, it will be a problem. It will be a flashing red sign to the Trump campaign that they need to start rethinking their strategy.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, Rachel, that is a key state for the president. He obviously won it in 2016. The state is going to host the Republican convention in 2020, where Donald Trump is, again, likely to accept his party's nomination. But, Rachel, as far as the topics we're talking about right now in Congress coming back into session, as Catherine and Jordan were speaking about earlier, there is a huge push on Capitol Hill to do something on gun control. Are you hearing anything on that topic right now down in North Carolina? Or I know you were up in New Hampshire just a couple of days ago. Anything from up there on the trail?
That is the topic on a lot of voters' minds here, a lot of Trump supporters. I asked, what is your #1 issue? And they say protecting our Second Amendment rights. We have seen people walk past us here. They have shirts that say that on there as well, saying they support the president. They have shirts with guns on them as well, saying that they should protect our rights here. So I asked, hey, listen, what about the president saying maybe he want to do meaningful background checks here? They say that, some people say that's not a very good idea. Some people say that's going to push voters, his support away. Other people are saying, hey, I don't have a problem with it, but what I do have an issue with is red flag laws. But the general consensus of what I'm getting from folks here that support Second Amendment rights and do not believe that we should be stricter on gun control, they're saying, listen, it's not people that are it's not the guns that are doing it, it's people. This is a line that we've heard the president say over and over again. And again, that boils back down to this race here. Dan Bishop has an A rating from the NRA, so they want to see him secure this spot here. But not to mention on not only guns here, right? We are about 100 miles away from Greenville, the location where those Send Her Back chants erupted earlier this summer, putting North Carolina in the spotlight. Folks still telling me here that they don't have a problem with the president's rhetoric, but that changes where you go in the country. I was just in New Hampshire, as you mentioned. I was with 19 Democratic candidates there. I spoke to one Republican who is now considering turning to vote for a Democrat because he says the president's rhetoric is just simply too inflammatory. Folks here telling me, yeah, maybe we don't agree with everything that he says, but we love the economy, we love what he's doing for gun rights, and that's where they stand. John?
It's going to be a long 14 months till Election Day. Rachel Scott crisscrossing the country. Thank you, Rachel. And speaking of things coming up until Election Day, I don't know, I think I mentioned this like 1, 3, or 10 times. We have a debate coming up Thursday night down in Houston. That's where we find ABC's Devin Dwyer. He took the early bird special, wanted to get there before things really got kicked off. Devin, I know you're down there and excited. It's great to see you. So before we dive into what you're talking about with voters down in Houston, you're already getting a lay of the land of the city. So we have 10 candidates coming there for our ABC debate. Let's take a look at the numbers right now from our new ABC News Washington Post poll that we released over the weekend. The top numbers, Devin, not too much surprise seeing Joe Biden holding on to a strong command at 27%, Bernie Sanders right behind him at 19%, but really a rise here, Devin, in this poll for Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren comes into this debate week, John, surging up 6 points in our poll from July, as you see. But I'm also struck by Joe Biden's durability. You see it there, despite all those gaffes and the negative headlines. New York Times, Washington Post saying he made up that story about Afghanistan. He is still on top. And voters tell us that's in large part because they want someone who is electable. And right now, Democrats continue to think Joe Biden is most electable, although we should say, take a look at the poll. Elizabeth Warren getting another look. She's still pretty far down compared to Joe Biden. 14% of Democratic voters think, she could potentially beat Donald Trump, but she is still hanging in there. This is, I think, a big week for her on that debate stage, head-to-head with Joe Biden for the first time. Can she bring those numbers up, John?
Well, and then on the flip side of that, obviously that's the top three. They're the only three, according to our poll, that are in double digits. But for others, like the rise we saw for Kamala Harris, who was doing quite well early on in the season, she's now in single digits. You can see it there on the screen from our latest poll, down to 7%. They really need to have a breakout moment here. And on a stage of 10 candidates, that's going to be quite a challenge, Devin.
Yeah, it's pretty close to do or die, John. I mean, these candidates in single digits and those that didn't even make this debate, you might think this is it for them. Although we should say, if you made this debate, you can still make the next debate in October. So there's at least one more go round for these candidates. Tom Steyer added to that next debate. We know he qualified. So we're kind of in this crunch time now with this tougher standard on the debate stage. I think a lot of people this week, I've been talking to folks down here in Houston. In fact, I'm in Boomtown Coffee here. It's about to turn into a bar. Great place if you're in town for a latte and a sandwich. Stop in here. But folks are really interested in seeing this smaller field for the first time, 10 candidates, and they want to hear about the issues. On campus earlier today, I was at Texas Southern University, historically black college, where the debate is going to be held. Students there are very eager to hear the candidates talking about guns, big issue in the state, of course, HBCUs, healthcare, and college debt, John.
And Devin, any candidate from your tour around campus, any candidate or candidates that you felt were resonating more with students compared to others?
There's a lot of popularity among the student crowds, as you know, for Bernie Sanders, although I was struck by the number of students we talked to were actually reluctant to say a name. They really want to hear the issues. They want to see these candidates up close. There's a lot of excitement for the first time that a Democratic primary debate will be held on a historically black college or university. Very significant, speaks to the Democratic Party's importance for African-American voters and for student voters. So a lot of anticipation to get up close, engage with these candidates when they're on campus this week before anybody's naming names down here, John.
All right, Devin. And Devin, hey, before I let you go, you've already done a good site survey of the town, right? You found a good restaurant for us to go to while we're there?
When you get down here, John Santucci, I will have a list of restaurants for you and all the ways you can keep cool. It is hot here. It's in the upper 90s with about 90% humidity, so bring cool clothes.
Oh, great. I'll make sure not to wear a tie just like you then. Okay, Devin Dwyer down in Houston, Texas. Thank you, my friend. And again, we're going to remind you for like the 500th millionth time. Don't worry, other people are going to do it too besides me. Our debate Thursday night right here on the ABC television network coming up at 8 p.m. You can watch it on ABC News or, of course, stream it live on Hulu and, of course, on ABC News Live. George Stephanopoulos, our chief anchor, along with David Muir, Lindsay Davis, and Univision's Jorge Ramos set to moderate. You do not want to miss it. I'm slightly biased, but it's going to be a good debate. That is going to do it for us in the briefing room. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm John Santucci. Make sure to download the ABC News app for any news anytime. You are watching ABC News.